The top table of European football is a closed shop now, we all know that. Getting your hands on the big-eared Champions League trophy is only the preserve of the teams from the big five European leagues, that are from France of course. It wasn't always this way. This video charts the rise of the two teams that have won the trophy from Eastern Europe, Steaua Bucharest and Red Star Belgrade. Steaua Bucharest won their first trophy in 1949, the Romanian Cup, before a trident of league titles between 51 and 53 came quickly thereafter. By the start of the 60s, they really got their foot in the door by reforming as the Armies team at the start of the decade. However, the rampant success seen by other similarly controlled clubs in Eastern Europe didn't follow. Steaua were prolific in the Cup, winning it 8 times in the 60s and 70s, but only claimed 3 league titles in the same time frame, in 1968, 76 and 78. The latter two came under Emeric Genai's tenure as manager, and yet he was replaced after the second of his championship wins by Georgi Constantin. Steaua had reasons to be optimistic from on high, however. Ilie Ceausescu, that's Nicolae Ceausescu's, the dictator's brother to you, he was the club's patron whilst his nephew Valentin ran the club day to day. When the 1980s dawned, Dynamo Bucharest were back in the driving seat of Romanian football as they won 3 titles and 2 cups on home soil before even reaching the European Cup semi-finals in 1984. Steaua watched it all from the sidelines, trophyless. The decree had already been written by 1984, however. Ceausescu demanded that both Bucharest clubs kept up to speed with one another so the wider profile of Romanian football could prosper. So in the 80s, Steaua went on a spree of poaching the best and brightest talent from around the country. In 1980, the adaptable Gavril Balint was joined by Stefan Jovan from Rasita. Mihail Majuru followed that year before goalkeeper Helmut Ducadam and Miodrag Belodici were poached in 82. The young Marius Lakatush was brought in from Brasov and the prolific Victor Prichoka was signed in 1983, and both would become vital throughout the 80s. Finally, the splurge was completed by Adrian Bubenscu, Ilie Barbulescu, Laszlo Boloni and Lucian Balan. It also didn't hurt that Emeric Genai was back in charge of Steaua by 1983 and he would complete the team with his training methods that largely included one-touch football. Which leads us to May the 15th, 1985 and a Bucharest derby which ends goalless. That all but confirms Steaua's return to the title, capping off a domestic double-winning season. It meant a return to the European Cup, a competition in which Steaua had yet to win a tie-in. Whilst they were unbeaten at home, winning 3 of 5 matches, they had lost every single away game in the competition. This trend continued into UEFA's other competitions. They had lost just 3 of 15 home games in the UEFA Cup and Cup Winners' Cup, yet had only won 4 ties on their travels. There was nothing to suggest that things would change for the 1985-86 season. Romania was a country where daily calories had been rationed down to 1100 as recently as 1984, and television was still only broadcasted for 2 hours per day. Because of this, you have a cash-strapped club with an underdog group of players and their supporters climbing Loam Hill to receive the Hungarian signal so they could follow their players' efforts on the continent. Steaua's stadium didn't even have floodlights and despite it all only supplied one of their country's 20 players for their most recent Euros in '84. Then they were drawn Vejle of Denmark and finally got their first European Cup result on the road, drawing 1-1 which was only salvaged thanks to a Marin Radu equaliser. Within moments of the return leg in Romania, it was clear that the home side would win, taking 6 minutes to break the deadlock before romping to a 4-1 win. In the last 16, fortune smiled on Steaua with the draw of Honved, a team with its glories firmly remaining in 3 decades prior. And yet, from their visit to Budapest, Steaua returned home with nothing despite dominating the Hungarians, going down to a Lajos Detari sucker punch. Not that it mattered. Steaua started another home leg fast, scoring after just a minute from an opposition goalkeeping spillage before taking the aggregate lead by half-time, before eventually clocking up another 4-1 home win. Steaua still hadn't won on the road in the competition, but it was true that they never looked like exiting the competition, and they were now in the quarter-finals. A stage of proceedings where you expected to run into trouble, especially when teams like Bayern, Barcelona and Juventus still occupied the draw, and even the likes of Aberdeen, Gothenburg and Anderlecht had history in the form of the UEFA Cup or Cup Winners' Cup medals. And yet Steaua were handed Finnish side FC Kuusisi, which apparently means FC 69, which sounds like a bunch of uni lads' five-a-side team name. Either way, it was these minnows who were the first to stop Steaua winning a European Cup game on home soil in the first leg. After the 0-0 draw, Steaua were in serious trouble despite the level of opposition. They dominated the first leg without result and now had to go to Helsinki and win for the first time away in the European Cup. The Finns remained resolute for 86 more minutes. That was until the ties deadlock was finally broken when Peterka gambled on a rebound and sent his side through to the semi-finals. Steaua would simply have to improve when they met Anderlecht, a team that might not strike fear into the hearts of a European semi-finalist these days, but in 1986 they had won the Cup Winners' Cup twice and the UEFA Cup in the space of 10 years. The prize should Steaua win the contest was a final in Spain against one of Barcelona, who had won 2 Cup Winners' Cups, 3 Fairs Cups and were former European Cup finalists, or IFK Gothenburg, who had won the UEFA Cup 4 years prior. Steaua travelled to Brussels for the first leg and for the first time in the competition they were on the back foot. Only brilliant goalkeeping kept the score down to 1-0 and in the end it was a 75th minute Enzo Scifo fluke which was crossed into the net that separated the sides ahead of the reverse fixture in Bucharest. Only now could Romania as a watching public witness this Steaua team on the television. Up till now, RTV director Dumitru Grauer had hired a van in vain to broadcast Steaua's home games in the hope that the regime would authorise a last gasp broadcast. They hadn't done until now. And the viewers were treated to a typically fast Steaua start 4 minutes on the clock when Peterka volleyed into the Belgian net. Balint added a second after some horrific Anderlecht defending which all but ended the Belgian hopes. Even with what was effectively a half-goal deficit, Anderlecht daren't attack and Steaua were comfortable in adding a third on 71 minutes. Romania would be represented in the European Cup final. The shocking news coming from across Europe was that they wouldn't be meeting Gothenburg but Barcelona on Spanish soil in the final. Barca had come from 3 goals behind to tie up their semi-final before winning the tie on penalties. Steaua had half a chance should they face the Swedes. Now they were given no hope whatsoever. For Romanians in this time, football was a natural diversion from everyday life, especially after the Chernobyl disaster only 1,000 kilometres away in neighbouring Ukraine hit and devastated the area. On the field, everything else couldn't be more stacked against them. Barcelona effectively had home field advantage and Steaua would be missing captain Tudorel Stoica through suspension. In a 65,000 capacity, Steaua would be represented by 200 club officials and 800 hand-picked Communist Party members. Emmerich Janai had just one simple line to fire his players up when he said, "Wouldn't it be pity not to take home the trophy having reached the final, knowing the chance might never come again?" His players gave it absolutely everything to suffocate the Barcelona attack, which was fronted by Bernd Schuster and Steve Archibald. They just about held on for extra time until Barcelona found the net through Pichi Alonso. Fortunately for Steaua, it was quickly rebuffed by the referee and this goalless game would be settled from the spot, only the second European Cup final to be decided in such a way. For a bit it looked as though the two sides were testing the patience of the watching world by carving out a goalless penalty shootout too. Majero and Bologna both missed their kicks whilst Dukadam thwarted both Alexanko and Pedraza. It was only Lakatush's devastating kick in off the bar that stopped the shootout from still taking place today. Pichi Alonso, the only other man to have found the net that evening, was next, but he ballooned his kick into the goalkeeper, which left Balint to calmly roll Steaua's second of the evening between the sticks. Before the bizarrest penalty shootout of all time ended in apt fashion. Marcos Alonso, son of Marcos Alonso, didn't keep Barca's slim hopes alive and against all odds, Steaua Bucharest had won the European Cup on penalties, 2-0. By the time they next inhabited a European Cup final 3 years later, they had yet to lose in the league. Champions in '86, they went the subsequent 3 years unbeaten and claimed the league from Dinamo in a run that ended with a cataclysmic Bucharest derby with the tally at 104 matches. By now, Steaua added to their ranks with now household names in Western Europe: Dan Petrescu, Ilie Dumitrescu and Georgi Hagi. It was all change in the dugout too, as Janai left for the national team job and Angel Iordănescu got a promotion after spending 2 years as number 2. Whilst Peterșa and Ducadam had left, Steaua just kept rolling the same as they had always done, only now they were backed by automobile giants Ford. They stopped just about short of selling Georgi Hagi to Juventus for millions plus a Fiat car plant in what was supposed to be communist Bucharest. Either way, a year later they were back after bowing out as champions to Anderlecht at the first hurdle and retaining a taste for more European Cup silverware with a semi-final exit to Benfica in '88. The Super Cup had been won against Valery Lobanovsky's Dynamo Kiev, and once Sparta Prague and Spartak Moscow fell, it was on. Gothenburg stood in their way, and since '86 they had added a second UEFA Cup to their arsenal. Not that it stopped Steaua running through them in a 5-1 second leg rout in Romania. Steaua got some of their old luck back as they avoided both Real Madrid and Milan, the preeminent teams of Spain and Italy respectively, before being handed Galatasaray in the semi-final. A 4-goal haul over the Turks in the first leg left things in no doubt ahead of a return to Spain for another European Cup final. If the '86 occasion had been a tight, tense, cagey match against a similarly nervous opponent who hadn't won the European Cup before as well, the '89 edition couldn't have been more different. No, Milan hadn't won the European Cup for 20 years, but they had enough quality either side of the white line to get them forward. Arrigo Sacchi's tactics left Steaua Bucharest bereft, and a brace of braces from Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten made for the most convincing of European Cup final victories. But before we answer that, I need to tell you about how I watch every single Premier League match completely legally, which means it's VPN time! A VPN hides your IP address, which lets you safeguard your internet connection. So, the absolute opposite of what the Manchester United defence would do. Am I right? No? Okay. And for those who haven't skipped this YouTube advert because you bloody love a bargain, here's why you should choose private internet access, today's video sponsor. 1. They're offering you an insane 83% VPN discounts and 4, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 months completely free. See it like Manchester City buying Citigroup players for a knockdown price. 2. You can protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. Chelsea's transfer strategy for 1. You want 783 devices protected, just buy them all up and protect them. 3. You can access region-restricted content from all over the world 365 days a year. Good news for Spurs fans whose passports are usually back in that cupboard by December. That is private internet access. Links to the discount in the description. Red Star and Belgrade have been central to the European Cup ever since the Munich air disaster of 1958. It was a successful quarter-final against Red Star in which the Manchester United players were returning from when disaster struck upon refuelling in Germany. Yugoslavian football loved a good old wilt. The country had been World Cup semi-finalists in both 1930 and 1960, as well as losing the inaugural European Championships final of 1960. Partizan Belgrade were the only Yugoslavian side to have reached the European Cup final, and they promptly lost that to the Kings of Europe Real Madrid in 1966. Red Star Belgrade weren't immune though. They chucked in the 1979 UEFA Cup final to Borussia Mönchengladbach and had got out of semi-finals in each of UEFA's competitions, twice in the European Cup and once apiece in the Fairs Cup and Cup Winners' Cup. They had made their mark, however indirect it may have been. In their elimination of Liverpool from the European Cup in 1973, they inadvertently gave the English club the tactical idea that they won 4 European Cups with between 1977 and 84. This time frame was a frustrating one for Red Star. They had had the Yugoslav Championship in 1986 awarded to them but ripped away on appeal. They had appeared in the European Cup but gallingly had been dumped out on away goals to Real Madrid in 1987 and lost on penalties to Milan a year later. The start of the 90s marked a domestic double thanks to a first title in 6 years won by a staggering 11 points from Partizan and a cup won from Hajduk Split. They would be Yugoslav's representatives in the European Cup, but the catch was nobody knew what would last longer, the 1990-91 European Cup campaign or Yugoslavia as a country. War had already become an inevitability by the time Red Star had won their title. On May 13, 1990, 1 week after the Croatian Democratic Union won an election, Dinamo Zagreb met Red Star Belgrade in the Yugoslav League. The match, made famous for Zvonimir Boban's kick on a police officer and his subsequent ban, led to an all-out riot and has been said to have been a big landmark which sparked the Croatian War of Independence. With Croatia and Slovenia keen to reorganise the country, it could well be Red Star Belgrade's final chance to win the European Cup as a Yugoslavian team. Keeping goal was Stevan Stojanovic behind an all-action sweeper Miodrag Beladici, who you might remember from the last section. Marauding down the right was Randinovic alongside the midfield kingpin of Prozineski, whilst Vladimir Jugovic anchored the side in midfield. Red Star were missing the talisman Dragan Stojkovic after he was coaxed away to Marseille after his sublime performances helped take Yugoslavia to the quarter-finals at Italia 90. And yet they still had the insatiable front line of Dejan Savicevic and Darko Panchev. It was a team with an unmissable Serbian spine, but also one that celebrated Yugoslavia in all of its guises, with those from Kosovo, Montenegro, Macedonia, Bosnia and, in Prozineski, famously one Croatian. Red Star were forced to dispense with manager Dragoslav Šekularak after he picked up an 8-match European ban for attacking a steward in a UEFA Cup loss to FC Köln. He was therefore replaced by Lupko Petrovic. Petrovic was definitely on his way up the managerial ladder as opposed to down. He cut his teeth with the national team's youth squads before good spells at Osijek and Vojvodina earned him his biggest job yet. He was wedded to an attacking form of pressing football which suited his new team to a T. In the first round they met Otmar Hitzfeldt's Grasshoppers and instantly ran into a roadblock known as a 1-1 draw in a home leg. It left Red Star needing to hop over to meet the Swiss team in the second leg and claim a win or a high-scoring draw. From the moment the game kicked off, the result wasn't in doubt as Red Star romped to 3 goals without reply before claiming the 5-2 aggregate triumph. Next were Rangers, who deployed assistant manager Walter Smith on a scouting mission to Belgrade, where he allegedly returned with a 2-word report: "We're fucked." And fucked they were after John Brown put through his own net and Prozineski thumped in a 3 kick before Panchev squeezed in a 3rd in Belgrade. The tie therefore was long gone by the time Ibrox came around, as Rangers could only reaffirm some pride with a 1-1 draw as Red Star marched on. Next were Dynamo Dresden and another home first leg, but once again no qualms as Prozineski netted another free kick as Red Star yet again whitewashed their opponents. Binic bundled in a second before a decisive Savicevic finish put an end to the match as a contest. Whilst the return leg in Dresden was a little competitive, the match spiralled out of East German control both on and off the pitch, as rioting got the match thrown out with 12 minutes left on the clock. Red Star were only losing 2-1 and Dynamo needed 3 more goals to progress, so the tie was effectively over anyway. It was made to look even better when UEFA awarded Red Star with a 3-0 walkover win and a 6-0 aggregate victory. Before Red Star stumbled into their toughest task yet, Bayern Munich. Former 3-time champions and finalists as recently as 1987. They lost to an underdog team back then in Porto and had lost Lothar Matthäus since, so Red Star were hoping for some of the same. It didn't look to be the case as Roland Wolfart netted for Bayern on 23 minutes as the Yugoslavians appeared to wilt on another grand stage. Until Darko Panchev scored from a scintillating counter that epitomised the Red Star team before Dejan Savicevic added a second invaluable away goal on the counter 20 minutes from the end. Red Star could even afford to lose 1-0 and progress to a first European Cup final. By the way the legendary second leg at the Belgrade Maracanã played out, you could tell that thought was nowhere near Red Star Belgrade's players. Najdovski was out, so in came Marovic tucking in from left back, but Red Star still kept ticking along as usual. They held the patient possession football of Bayern off, with the antidote of their relentless counter-attacking always an option, as proven when Sinisa Mihailovic netted the opener midway through the first half. And yet that advantage was overturned with 2 quick-fire Bayern goals midway through the second half, which left the onus on the German club before the match dwindled into extra time. They thought they had won it, only for Stefan Effenberg to squander a glorious opportunity late on, before the net finally rippled at the other end when Klaus Augenthaler put through his own net from a Mihailovic cross. 2-2 draw in a spellbinding semi-final. Fans celebrated with the demolition of the goalposts and the ripping up of turf because they knew it was the end of Red Star playing as a part of a Yugoslavia. In Darko Pančev, Red Star had the most prolific goalscorer that season with 40 goals in 42 matches. Their counter-attacking style was incredible and would remain in place for the challenge of Marseille, which meant that Red Star would be reunited with Dragan Stojkovic, albeit for 8 minutes after a cameo substitute appearance in extra time. A team crammed full of stars, talent and money against one forged on the backbone of team ethic and the counter. It was supposed to be one of the all-time great European Cup finals, but all we got was a poor excuse of 2 hours that saw both first-time finalists paralysed by fear. Red Star were told not to keep the ball. Marseille did not know how to break down their opponents, and 120 minutes later, we at least had a penalty shootout to shout about. Manuel Amoros missed Marseille's first kick, and for the subsequent 7 attempts from 12 yards, no other player missed, consigning the French team to the silver medal and Red Star to the tag of European champions. Even in a world before football got perfected for Western Europe in the late 90s, these victories were an almighty shock. Both Steaua and Red Star had the capabilities and were still able to hold on to players who could earn European Cups in their own right with marvellous football. But both had seen clubs reach finals beforehand whilst playing entertaining football. Each of Saint Etienne, Club Brugge and Borussia Mönchengladbach waltzed to the final entertaining the continent before losing said final never to return. And those are just teams from the 70s. No, the champions from Bucharest and Belgrade, they both dug in the final and won it in eerily similar fashion, grinding out 0-0s, winning on spot kicks and taking the trophy home behind the Iron Curtain. The Steaua team that reached 2 European Cup finals was wholly disbanded within 12 months of Nicolae Ceausescu's felling of 1989. By this point, almost half of Romania supported Steaua, whilst Dinamo were the ones at the actual summit of football in the country. The tide in both senses could be seen to have turned in the first Bucharest derby of the 1989-90 season when Dinamo won out 3-0. Later in the year, demonstrators in Timisoara rebelliously lobbed framed photos of Ceausescu out of the Communist Party office windows. That led to the protest turning violent, inflicting casualties and prompting a revolution. Yugoslavia, alternatively, had already fallen by the time Red Star had gotten their hands on the famous trophy. The first casualties of the Balkan Wars landed equidistant between Red Star's quarter and semi-final ties, and by the time of the final in Bari, a full-scale conflict was at Belgrade's doorstep. Several Yugoslav states declared independence, and with war incoming, Red Star players naturally fled, with the entirety of their European Cup winning squad departing by the end of the 91-92 season. Stojanovic, Sabanazovic, Prozineski and Binic had all left upon their winning of the European Cup. Still, Red Star proved competitive in the competition, only failing to reach the subsequent year's final after a loss at home to Sampdoria in the group phase. With the war only rumbling on by that point, the rest of the squad exited, chief among which Mihailovic, Pančev and Savicevic, who all departed for Serie A. And with that, football was in a whole new era. The Champions League would be born in time for the 1992-93 season as communism crumbled in the east and the Bosman ruling was formed in the west. European football became a sport for the few, not the many as it had been before. It really was a bleak time for Yugoslavia, but out of those ashes came this brilliant Croatian team, and you can learn about them here.